Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the sixth panel discussion in our series, The World Awakens, where we hear from a lineup of experts on the challenges and benefits of building distributed teams. I'm David Holland from Employment Hero, where I focus on helping our clients manage their businesses in the new normal of distributed teams. The World Awakens series has been designed to explore the opportunities and challenges of managing distributed employment because we believe that businesses that are able to succeed in a remote-first world will achieve better outcomes for both the business as well as the employees and create a more sustainable long-term future. As usual, we have Julia with us today in the background who'll be helping us curate Q&A. So please add your questions using the button on your screen, and that's the Q&A button rather than the chat, because it definitely helps us curate the questions if you can use the Q&A specifically. I'm joined today by my colleague, Alex Hadding, partly as co-host, but mostly as a subject matter expert with deep experience building and managing remote teams, most recently our own. Alex is our Chief People Officer at Employment Hero. Some of you may already be familiar with her as she hosts many of our digital HR masterclasses. Alex has over 15 years in partnering with leadership teams to establish a continuously improve company culture and employee experience. Alex derives energy and passion from excellence in driving people performance. Her roles have covered international Fortune 500 companies through to homegrown Aussie startups like Employment Hero and others. Key notable companies under Alex's belt before Employment Hero are Commonwealth Bank, Monster, Yahoo, and Google. So welcome, Alex.
Hey, great to be here. Hi, everybody.
I now have the pleasure of introducing our panelists for today. I'm very excited. Zoe Routh is founder and director at Inner Compass. An award-winning author and leadership expert. She's English-born, Canadian-raised, and Australian-adopted. She's an outdoor adventurist, experiential educator, truth-teller, learner, cancer dancer, one-time belly dancer, aspiring telemark skier, slayer of dragons, and mother of chickens. From the wild rivers of Northern Ontario to the remote regions of Australia, Zoe has spent the last 30 years showing teams struggling with office politics and silos how to work together better. She is obsessed with showing big thinkers and with big hearts and how to make a big difference. Her high-impact leadership learning adventures take place indoors and outdoors in spectacular settings. Her fourth book, People Stuff, won Book of the Year at the Australian Business Book Awards last year. So, welcome. There we go. There it is. And very excited to welcome Rev Venkatraman from Slack, where she's the head of success for Asia Pacific region. Based out of Sydney, she has extensive experience in successfully leading customer success, enterprise support, pre-sales, and professional services practices. Prior to Slack, Rev had leadership positions at Pluralsight, Citrix, and Oracle. And in all these positions, she developed a go-to-market strategy to support the sales organization for year-on-year revenue growth. She's passionate about the future of work, creating business impact, and high value for customers. Rev currently leads a team that contributes to the areas of customer success, diversity, earth tones, and women's ERG forums. So welcome to both our panelists. Thanks for joining us.
Lovely to be here.
Yeah, I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you.
All right, so as usual, just a quick reminder as to why we believe this topic's important in the context of remote work and asynchronous working, and we're talking today about engagement. But since the pandemic began, organizations have struggled to convert remote operations to a more sustainable model. A major contributing factor comes from the deep reliance on real-time synchronous communication, compensating for a lack of structure, visibility into work, and the self-management skills and those moments that we've talked about, those casual moments of contact in offices that we used to physically attend. The second reason is that teams that differentiate and navigate between using asynchronous and synchronous communication instead of defaulting into real-time connectivity have more success in increasing productivity and well-being in a remote environment, which, as we know, is critical to creating a sustainable remote environment. And I guess it's worth noting at the outset here today that Sydney in particular and New South Wales more generally is currently in a state of some restrictions, just as Victoria start to exit theirs. There's a great deal of uncertainty at the moment as to what the next week may hold, but certainly non-essential travel and trips to the office are being discouraged ahead of potentially further cases developing over the next few days. So this is a great reminder, if we ever needed one, that this is not going away quickly, and being able to work and adapt and exist in a remote environment is going to be a core skill for successful businesses and managers and teams. So that brings us to today's discussion, but as usual, we love to start with people sharing their own experiences of what remote has meant to them in the last year or longer. And I guess I might throw to you, Rev, first and ask you about your experience at Slack in particular. How did you go remote? When did you go remote? And what's that journey been like? And where do you see the immediate future? So welcome, Rev.
Thank you. Well, it's an interesting topic. I've been with Slack last almost a year. And when I joined, I onboarded into Slack, which was all remote and hybrid. So that was different to how it has been in the past. But more so at Slack, we did a research as part of our Future Forum initiative. And we researched about, with about 10,000 knowledge workers. And out of which 1,000 were in Australia and others from US, Europe, Japan, and rest of the globe. And interesting result. And the question was around what is future of work and how are we going to execute? What is it going to look like from their vision? And 83% actually responded saying they don't want to go back to old ways of working. And out of 83, interesting was 20% said they want full-time remote and 63% said they want a hybrid model. So definitely the thinking at Slack has been flexible and hybrid before we decide to think about how we can actually promote the whole asynchronous way of working. I have a team across APAC, that's my charter, and I have individuals in Australia between Sydney and Melbourne. I've launched in India and expanding into Singapore. With the COVID situation in India, it's fully remote. With Australia, of course, as you rightly said, with Sydney, in the dicey situation, and Melbourne has been. So we do have offices where people, the individuals, we go there to collaborate or celebrate or specific event. But our first port of call, of course, is the technology. We drink our own Kool-Aid or eat our own dog food, however you want to put it. But the way we operate is Slack first. That's where we go to get work done, and that's where decision is made. And then a physical location is where you go to meet, collaborate when you want to, and meet if you want to meet with customers when it is warranted. But definitely hybrid has been the way we've thought this through, David.
Yeah, thank you. Look, there will be some of the people listening in today who may not be very familiar with Slack. There will be those of us who rely on it every hour of our day. Do you want to maybe just give a 30, 60-second overview as to what problem Slack solves?
Yeah, absolutely. Slack is a collaboration platform, and it is a leader when it comes to the new ways of working and future of working. So we help our customers, to work with them and understand what is a collaboration strategy, what are the business outcomes that they want to achieve, and more effectively, collaboration and bringing individuals together plays a bigger role. And how do you simplify work in a more effective, inclusive, and a simplified manner is where the Slack platform plays a bigger role. And the function that I have is customer success organization, where we support customers who've invested in Slack to maximize the investment they've made, but at the same time, realize value. If one of the value is to drive business outcomes on culture of the organization, how can a customer success organization can partner with them to drive those outcomes for them?
Terrific, thank you. I've actually just, whilst we were sitting here, you were giving us the stats on the data that you were showing about hybrid and full-time. I've just slacked over to Jules a screenshot of our most recent survey, and I don't know whether or not she'll be able to throw it up, but you mentioned you guys saw 20% of employees were keen to remain working full-time remotely, and 63% were looking for a hybrid, so some office, some flexibility. The data that we have from our recent survey isn't very far off that. So 63% hybrid, you had 63, we have 66% hybrid. We have a slightly higher number, 28% of employees are looking to work full-time remotely. So there, Jules has managed to get that up on the screen. That's actually part of a comprehensive quarterly survey that we run across over 1,000 responses 4 times a year. And there's you can see that's question 10. There's actually quite a lot there. So 28% of employees are actually keen to continue working remotely full time. That's completely out of the office. So it's a huge number. Thanks, Jules, and thanks, Rev. Zoe, I'll throw over to you. Now, obviously, you've got an organization of your own. It's probably slightly smaller than Slack. Keen to hear about how you guys have managed the move to remote and when you did that. And also very keen to hear about what you're seeing with your clients and what you're seeing out there in the marketplace as well. What's been your experience?
Well, we're a very nimble team, so it's me as the primary principal, and I have support crew in Canberra and also around the world. And so we've been remote for years and years. I've had a virtual assistant in my business model for the last 10, 15 years. So working remotely, virtually has not been new to me. I've run webinars, etc. for years and years. So switching to primarily virtual during lockdown was not a big deal for me and my team. So we've developed all the collaborative tools. We're keen Slack users as well. So that's a really important platform for us to develop camaraderie and conversation in real time that doesn't clog up the inbox. I mean, that's for us, that's one of the primary virtues and assets of using something like Slack. And we have other collaborative apps as well to work on documents and task allocation. So that's been a really important aspect of our work. How we dealt with some of the challenges with COVID was probably similar to a lot of others, is that we need to be very clear with each other about where our movements are, so everybody has access to my diary, so they know not to message me when I'm delivering a presentation, say, for example, or that I won't be able to get back to them when I'm doing something like this, for example. And likewise, they need to let me know when they're doing focus work or when they're doing kid pickup and all that kind of stuff, so that I'm not looking to get an answer on something when they've got other commitments. So that transparency and making specific when we're in and out has been a really important, useful frame for us as a long-standing practice. In terms of how my clients have dealt with this whole thing, it really varied depending on the nature of the work. So, for example, I have some legal clients, and their primary challenge was, first of all, let's get the technology sorted, because they weren't used to doing Zoom conference calls. So it's like, okay, how do we work that out? Everybody have a laptop at home and internet at home? So there was technical things that they needed to adjust to. And in that particular profession, it was pretty easy after that. They appeared in court via Zoom or phone, so that was a nice change for them because they didn't have to dress up below the waist. They showed up professional above the waist, and they didn't have to commute and so on. So there was a high satisfaction rating in terms of that move to things, except in some cases where they could only do phone, it affected their ability to present their case effectively in court because they relied on the emotion to showcase in front of a judge with regards to their argument. So there were some drawbacks around that. Another organization which was had hands-on delivery, whether it was shelter, like housing shelter for homeless people, or drug and alcohol rehab, two of my different types of clients, their challenges were a little bit different because they had to keep showing up in person to service their clients. And there was all sorts of affiliated risks with that when COVID was going rampant through the community, and we didn't have as much knowledge about how to protect ourselves. So there was a heightened degree of stress management that people needed to handle to that. And then in the conversations that came through after that routine and standards of practice were established, there was jealousy. The frontline workers were like, well, they get to work from home, assuming that was easier, more relaxed, etc. So there was this real division in some organizations between frontline workers and the work from home workers. And that created some tension in the culture. In terms of people going back into what was before COVID, again, that varies greatly. I was speaking to a leader yesterday, and he's very much of the mind, everyone comes back 5 days a week. Point final. That's the way it is. And his workers don't want that. So it's becoming a stoush, a standoff, we think we can work more effectively from home. And then the leader's like, nah, all the benefits are about coming into the office and sharing camaraderie and idea making. And that's problematic because it's becoming headbutting exercise.
Yeah.
But the conversation, and I'll wrap this up for you, is really about how do we look at what's best for the employee and what's best for the organization. They don't need to be mutually exclusive. And it's in exploring the and conversation that real outcomes that are beneficial to both parties will be discovered.
Yeah, look, that's great. There's so many things to unpack there, and I'm actually going to take a moment because we've got some reflections from previous episodes to do so. First thing is digital diaries. You mentioned the introduction of digital diaries, so that not only can I see when you're available and not available, I can make plans for us to be together. So digital diaries, and of course your status on Slack, for those of you who have it, is a powerful tool and a lot of fun sometimes. You also mentioned there this concept of frontline workers versus knowledge-based workers. Sorry, that's my language, but it's been a big theme of our questions over the last 5 weeks as to how do I manage that? And I just wanted to sort of reiterate, one of the biggest lessons that we've had where you've got a construction site where people have to turn up, healthcare, retail, hospitality, with back office teams and knowledge workers who have the right or the ability to work from home. Really, the thing that came through for me in the last episodes is focus on what you can do that is collective. Obviously, your knowledge workers aren't going to turn up on a construction site just to create equality, but focus on the things that you can control. So reward and recognition programs should be consistent across frontline and knowledge-based workers. Really try and focus on how to harmonize the similarities and de-emphasize the differences. The second point that came through is that there will inevitably be situations where those who have to be somewhere, in a restaurant, in a factory, on a construction site, in a hospital, maybe they do need some additional support, some additional benefits. So they're probably the two biggest things I've come out. In terms of that specific point, Zoe, is there anything that you can add to that for our listeners?
That's a really great analysis and a proactive way of looking at it. I think in addition to, I was having a conversation with another leadership expert today around this very same topic. You know, it's like, is it a polarity, meaning that they're interdependent parts and they need to be managed together, or is it simply a problem in an organization that needs to be managed ongoing? And I think with it, whether it's on-site staff versus office-based staff, it's totally different worlds that are both contributing to the whole. And I think one of the things that could help with that is doing a type of results map or a systems map of the organization that on one page, it's kind of like a mind map showing the interdependencies. And when we showcase the interdependencies of different work functions, all of a sudden we get clear on how we fit as part of the whole. So we can disable or dissolve a little bit of the silo thinking, knowing that our work over here contributes to the bigger picture over here, and their work over there contributes to the bigger picture. And there's a little bit more of an appreciation of one another as a result.
Absolutely. And I think dispelling the fact that work from home, work from anywhere, flexible working is somehow a privilege. I think it absolutely is in our mind can be, if it's done properly, which is the aim of this series, it can be more productive or as productive. So thank you very much for that, Zoe. Alex, I'm going to throw to you quickly. We've heard the EH story in previous episodes, but I'm conscious of the fact that back in March last year, you and I spent a lot of time talking about how we were going to manage that transition, right down to getting laptops to our team in Manila. Any big reflections from you in terms of that transition and the 12 months since that we've been remote?
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't be more prouder of all of our people managers in the way that they pivoted in the way we worked. However, Dutchy and I worked really closely together, first of all, to put a real cadence in place so that people were having not just a routine and a reason to kind of get out of bed and their call to action, but also having FaceTime with their teams each and every morning. So a stand up, and then the leadership team would meet at 9:30 so that if anything needed to be actioned or executed, it got to the leadership team each day at 9:30, which I think was really fantastic. We also had to pivot to virtual interviewing, and we had to brainstorm about how would we make new hires feel our culture when they started. And so Esther, our head of Vibe, does these wonderful welcome packets that really showcases our culture to new employees, and the feedback we get is just fabulous because they receive that about a week before they start. We did a remote first guide or playbook to let people know when to use certain communication channels. For example, we're avid Slack users as well, but don't put an essay in Slack. Know when to actually set up a time for two-way communication. We also went global in Q4. Now, that was no easy task being remote first. And in doing that, we've set up some really great forums sessions where Ben Thompson, our CEO, on a monthly basis, meets with each and every country team for feedback and to check in on them. We make sure we record all of our all hands and important meetings so that people can watch those if they're not in their time zone. Reward and recognition has played a huge role. And back to your point, Rev, we eat our own dog food as well, and that is Employment Hero as a platform. So we use that for everything from one-on-ones with managers to constant reward and recognition, which across geographies and time zones, as well as with flexible work, just works really, really well. And we've seen a huge uptake in the usage of our reward and recognition system, which is great.
Fabulous. That's a great recap of some of our highlights. I've just been reminded that data I put up earlier is actually under embargo because it's very current, and it's going to be released generally in the next week or so. So you had a sneak preview of that by my mistake, but I think it was very relevant to today's discussion. That full press release with all the information about that survey will be coming out, and Jules has confirmed she'll share it with anyone that's registered for this series. So you'll get all that full data. We want to jump into asynchronous and how to manage businesses and teams and engagement in particular in an asynchronous environment. But before we do that, Rev, I'm going to throw to you, which I think is a little off script, but I want to talk about what asynchronous is. And you know, there are some obvious examples that perhaps some people are familiar with, and perhaps between the four of us, we can flesh out what some less obvious. But what's asynchronous to you?
Well, for that, let's talk about synchronous, right? Synchronous is where everything happens at one time, right? At the same time, in other words. And asynchronous is the opposite, which is basically work gets done at a time which is different from one another. So whether it is providing feedback, or whether it is reviewing a document, or whether making a decision, it is done at a pace and at a time which works for the individual and for the organization. So that for me is a definition of an asynchronous way of working.
Terrific, thank you. And Hattie, I'm going to throw over to you. We obviously have launched into multiple countries now, and we have colleagues who are 2 hours ahead of us and colleagues who are 10 hours behind us. That's an obvious example of asynchronous, and perhaps reflect a little bit on that, but also what about daily cadences of different people, parents? What does asynchronous mean to you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so it's completing tasks on your own timetable, which could be different to other colleagues. So to Dutchy's point, you might not just have people on different time zones. With flexible working, you might have a parent clocking off to help with their kids' homework or to do a school pickup. And so that means that they could update their Slack status. Again, that's so important to let people know what you're doing so that they can't expect an immediate response from you. And then you might log in on your own time to be doing that work that you can do without it having to be synchronous at the same time as others. And that's where it's really important that we document things in this remote world of work. Documenting meetings and recording things like all hands is really important so that people can catch up on that work where it doesn't have to be at the same time in their own time.
Terrific. And I should say there are moments when our CEO and founder, Ben, does actually make the effort to participate in some of our far-flung offices or teams, because we don't have offices in those countries, in real time in their business hours. But most of it is done asynchronously via technology. So Zoe, many of the issues that we've seen around remote have been around burnout and increased hours and meetings going late into nights and stuff. The fact that companies need to be intentional about their change for remote work. Some companies have simply picked up their office routines, their office cadences, and all those practices that we've had for over 100 years and moved that into a remote environment. That's probably not a great way to do it. How have you seen asynchronous in remote managed well?
Managed well. I was going to start with where things go pear-shaped, and I think because the converse of that is where it can go well. I think where it's gone derailed is when people have assumptions about what people are doing, and where there's not clear boundaries about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So an example of how to do this badly is having time zone bias. And so asynchronous is, if you have people from all over the world there, it's like who gets to run the meeting in the time zone that's suitable to them. Like it's kind of a status play in some ways. It doesn't have to be, but it's something that we need to be mindful of. And because of all this remote working and virtual work, it's people become a lot more aware of time zones. I know when I moved to Australia 25 years ago, I knew nothing about time zones. It was a bit naive. And I remember ringing up New Zealand from Canada, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning there. Well, you only make that mistake once when you're trying to make a good impression. And yet, I think what's happened through some of this remote stuff is that we've just assumed that because people show up to a clock and a meeting at 2 a.m. that it's okay. They'll just make it work somehow. It's like, well, no, it's not. And I think there's some assumptions that come out of this time zone bias that we need to clean up. And I think the accessibility due to technology has created poor boundaries for people as well. So when the remote work is handled well, those boundaries are clearly negotiated. Expectations, assumptions, and boundaries are put in place. And sometimes you don't know what those are until you run smack head first into them. An example of that was there was a professional who needed an answer from his team member on a project they were working with a deadline. And he rang up his colleague and she said, "Oh, I'm just at the gym. And it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Can I call you back in half an hour?" And he's like, "Okay." And he put the phone down and he went, "Is it okay? Is it okay that she's at the gym at the middle of the day when we had this deadline happening?" And in our discussion about it, I was like, well, did you have any discussion around expectations around this particularly time-sensitive thing or principles in general? And if you are going to have the freedom, flexibility to do that, how do we make that work for both people? So it's about surfacing those little things that lead to broader principles that are really essential. Because I think a lot of the tension and conflict has been around assumptions, that people assume that you're going to be working 9 to 5 in your home-based office, where people haven't been because of the opportunity to do other things, to have personal appointments, all that kind of stuff. And they've been more productive as a result. And so there's just this misalignment of expectations and boundaries around that. So I think that's it's very basic, and yet it doesn't feel basic when you run into that in the middle of it. So for example, one of the programs I was running, I realized that after the fact, or in the middle of the fact, that I actually needed technical support while I was running a program, and that trying to do it all by myself was a deficit to the people who were attending. So just like you have Julia supporting us, I needed someone like that to do my programs. It wasn't until I ran smack into that problem where I realized my team members weren't available, that hang on a minute, we need to be planning these things ahead a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's the thing, moving to remote first and potentially running in asynchronous environments doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100% off kilter. It doesn't excuse everybody of all responsibilities. There are still expectations. But I think that the key points I picked up from you, Zoe, is that you need to set those clear boundaries and expectations. So if there are times when people are required to be online and expected to be working, then that needs to be established. And then surfacing those issues either by planning or, as you said, running face smack into them, I think was the expression you used. So we're all going to continue learning about those. Rev, your team is obviously, I presume, spaced out at least over APAC, given that's your responsibility, possibly broader. What are some of those issues that you might have surfaced in terms of having to deal with? What is asynchronous thrown up for you to have to manage?
Yeah, I mean, I firstly, some of the points Zoe mentioned is spot on, right? And I just put this comment in the channel as well, where, technology, when it is implemented thoughtfully, actually increases this whole sense of I don't have boundaries versus I have boundaries. So that's more important. And David, when we talk about this whole synchronous and asynchronous, you talk about synchronous where face-to-face, adding a video conferencing into the mix. Yeah, that's happening at the same time. And you go to the other extreme of email, which is asynchronous way of working. But what happens in between is all the strategies that we typically use within Slack to work in this whole asynchronous manner. And I have a team that is spread across. As I mentioned, Slack is the first port of communication. So which does mean when I have my one-on-one, I have a channel that is set up with the individual for, any confidential or sensitive conversations. But given I manage customers we've got to communicate with the customers as well. So we've got to be mindful of not adding the layer of additional pressure of continuous meetings and meetings after meetings too. And as much as you say no meeting Friday, then Monday to Thursday is packed up with back-to-back meetings. So how do you manage that fatigueness as well? So typically, the rule of thumb is taking a look at your calendar to see what can be done in an async manner. Right? What can we do using the channel and our collaboration with our cross-functional businesses? Can it be resolved by using technology in the first place? And then, of course, taking a look at external channels too. Slack Connect is another way where we connect with our either customers or partners or vendors, and that's a way of coming and bringing them into the thought process of managing our day-to-day work. But for my own team, if it is super urgent, I put emojis. We actually underestimate how powerful it is. I put a red button when it is super important, which means they've got to take a look at it straight away, and blue versus white buttons. But if it is urgent, the team will put a pair of eyes, which means they are taking a look at it and they'll come back to me. So things like that, little celebrations that we do to create that that whole experience. Using technology has been the way I've approached with the team.
Yeah, we're going to come on to more deep. Sorry, yeah, jump in, sir.
Yeah, I think Rev's points made me think about some of the critical practices that we have, whether asynchronous, synchronous, virtual, or together. And reevaluating meetings has been a whole huge topic in work conversations for a year. And I think that's absolutely a scope for us that we can do better as leaders and as teams, is challenging ourselves to do meetings completely differently. Whether you take some of Donna McGeorge's principles in her book, The 25-Minute Meeting, which is a fabulous piece of work. And the idea is let's rigorously assess, what is this meeting about? And I recommend that people actually divide their meetings in types of meetings. Is it a decision-making meeting? Is it a planning meeting? Is it a problem-solving meeting? Is it a celebration meeting? And you just have one theme dedicated to that one particular meeting. And avoid information dumping, because that can go up on your Slack channel, that can go up onto your other platforms if you just need rapid updates. And when people come to meetings with a specific purpose, they know which brain gear to put themselves into, and they can contribute more effectively that way. So I know with our team, we've got
Can you just, were those categories something that you've structurally thought out, or is that just off the top of your head?
No, those are things I've really thought about.
Could you just recap on what they were? I heard planning,
decision-making, problem-solving, idea generating,
and celebration.
And celebration, yeah.
That's great. I think that's something we'll be looking at introducing, because Hattie, meetings are the source of some contention, both in the office environment. It's not unique to remote working, but perhaps it's becoming more noticeable. Meetings for the sake of meetings. How do we do better meetings? Is that something we've had to address at Employment Hero?
We haven't, although we did introduce a cadence of making sure we had FaceTime more often as we moved to remote work. So, for example, we moved our all hands to a weekly cadence to make sure everyone was getting business updates and that we were celebrating milestones such as anniversaries and new hires on a weekly basis, to really make sure that we had that Zoom FaceTime every Friday, as well as getting those business updates and anything important across the line. Again, make sure you record those meetings so that anyone who can't attend, whether they're out of time zone or it could be sales at the end of the month, they can catch up on that on the Monday.
Terrific. Is it Google that used to say that meetings should only be X minutes? And I know Zoe referenced the work around the 25-minute meeting, but at Google, didn't they introduce a rule that meetings could only be a maximum of X minutes?
No, they what they did was they found that people were not respecting conference rooms, so they changed. You could only book a conference room for 55 minutes to make sure everyone had left the conference room before the next people came in.
Got it, the 55 minutes. I think I'm going to say, knowing our organization, it might be Elon Musk who set a principle that if you're in a meeting and you're not adding value, you have absolute permission to exit that meeting, and not just necessarily abruptly. You may want to excuse yourself, but people who are called into meetings, particularly online, when it's really easy to just go click, 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 and add a lot of people, permission to leave a meeting, I think, is something that I've seen done very effectively. That saves people a lot of time. But I love that idea of categorizing them. So that's been great. moving on a little, so I'm going to come to you. Silos in organizations, and particularly when you're potentially restricted to an organizational hierarchy. A lot of people have highlighted the increase in silos since we went remote. Seems to have made the situation worse. Add in the complexity of teams working in different locations and to different cadences. It's obviously a recipe for communication challenges. What are some of the practical ways that leaders can manage to avoid silos? Where does responsibility for silos really rest?
Well, those are two big questions. So I'll start with the easier one, which is how do you actually deal with the fact that people, if they're working through screens only, bury themselves in their own work and feel a little bit disconnected from their colleagues. A couple of strategies for that are definitely having all hands conversations or team conversations so that you can do one of those particular theme meetings. So everybody gets to collaborate around problem solving, decision making, all that kind of thing. That's one way to bring people together. The other way is it's all about visibility. And one of the key principles from a team engagement point of view is to make progress visible. This is one of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's discoveries when he was doing his work on flow, is that when we feel like we are getting a sense of progress, then we feel more engaged and motivated at work. And when we have a sense of being able to see progress across a whole team through using one of our online collaborative tools, then it's a way of seeing, hey, people working on this project over there in France are contributing to the progress of the whole over here in Australia. And so when we have that visibility on a platform, whether it's a simple Gantt chart or an Excel spreadsheet or even a Todoist or task list that you can see things getting checked off, it's a way of having some sort of insight and observation of what other people are doing. So that sort of gives us a little clue into that. The other way, I'd probably reiterate a little bit of the results mapping technique, which is from Stacey Barr's work, who is international expert on key performance management. And the results mapping is about, again, doing a diagrammic view, like a mind map of how the interdependencies of the work come together. And that, when you do that work together, is an easy way to break down silos, because you can see the whole organization on a page and how they all connect together. So it's actually changing the mindset and understanding of how my work affects somebody else and how somebody else's work affects mine, and how we can collaborate and sometimes compete against one another. So sometimes teams have competing interests, and we can be aware of that and break down some of the issues that arise about that. So the key principle is visibility of the progress of the interdependencies. And then coming to probably the last point is making sure that people have projects that they can work together that is cross silos, or challenges that go across silos. So it gets them to think out of their own little box and elevates their leadership thinking a little bit, that's more organizational in nature. And that's one of the complaints or challenges I hear a lot of CEOs talk about, is that their executive are too silo based. They don't think whole of organization. Well, you need to give them structures and projects to be able to develop the capacity to think like that. You don't sort of automatically wake up and go, oh, I understand the whole of the complex. You need to help people figure out how those things come together and play together.
That's great. And Zoe, I'll just jump in there and also add, one of the things we've found is to make sure we don't lose the kind of fun aspect of our culture, is doing those virtual fun things, like we've done virtual drag queen bingo, virtual The Amazing Race. And that really not just gets different teams together where you go into Zoom rooms with different people that you might not work with on a daily basis. You're getting together in a social manner, which is really fantastic. And we also run themes every quarter at Employment Hero, and we have what we call a theme team. And back to your point, Zoe, that's getting a bunch of people together who would never normally work together on a daily basis to help solve the problem and solve what we're trying to solve for in that particular theme for that quarter. And it's a really great forum to get to know other people in the business.
That's fantastic. Well done. I think that's awesome. I like theme teams. Love it.
Theme teams, yes. Awesome. So I think, Zoe, what I heard there in terms of responsibility is you mentioned leadership. Obviously, it needs to start with leadership, but it doesn't stop with leadership. We have a value in our business called Own It, and we really encourage everyone and empower everyone to take responsibility. I think I heard you say that really it's up to everybody in the team to make sure that they're looking you can make stuff visible, but as a team member, I need to be looking for that progress and looking to understand my role as well. Is that a fair summary?
I didn't say that at all, but I'm glad you did. But so, because I forgot that part of your question, which is who is responsible for the silos. And you're absolutely right. It's everyone's responsible for the feel of the organization. And I think we need to make sure, first of all, leaders need to make sure that their systems are in place to help bridge any of those silos. Now, there's going to be work that people naturally gravitate to because that's the nature of their delivery. Whether, for example, whether it's the on-site staff and the office space staff, those are two silos effectively, and they're going to naturally want to hang out together. And our systems need to make sure that we put less friction between those two entities and help bridge the understanding and experience of one another. And I think Hattie's examples are really useful in that way to showcase how we can do that. So there's the systems at play in the organization that as leaders we need to manage. We need to set up rituals and so that people can engage and interact better and get to understand each other a little bit better. The individual responsibility, absolutely, and we need to be mindful, though, is that not everybody's at the same stage of leadership maturity. Now, some people are just trying to get to terms with how they do their job, let alone worry about Frank who works in New Zealand. He's like, this is as much as I can do right now, trying to figure out the technology, 1, 2, my scope of roles and responsibilities. So as leaders, I think we need to be mindful of that. How much experience does the individual have? And gently assist people to expand their way of conceiving of their work within the whole. It's not an easy leap to make from a leadership maturity point of view.
Yeah, sure. Rev, I'm going to ask you a specific question. I'm keen to get your thoughts more generally on this topic, but I'm going to ask you a specific question. Other than Slack,
yeah,
what tools are sort of front of mind when you're managing your team or you see your colleagues on leadership managing their teams?
Yeah, I mean, I just saw someone post Trello as a useful tool there, but yeah, we do have, everything else which comes as part of it. We have something like a donut pairing, which is within Slack where you connect with individuals that's outside your business, very similar to a water cooler conversation. So you go reach out to them, have a conversation about any topic without agendas. So that's one kind of tool that we rely on. And then, of course, you do have something called a celebration bot, where, if there's anyone's anniversary or if you've got, an event coming up for birthdays or something that will remind you. So technology is actually helping the leader to, create that experience of celebration for the individuals. Then, we do have integration. The good thing about Slack is, of course, it's best of breed that is coming into it, like Workdays of the world, Concurs of the world. So the stress level that an individual goes through by clicking into different windows, different applications, everything is embedded and integrated into Slack. So the workflow efficiency is actually contributing to a number of, just the fatigueness an individual goes through.
We love our celebration bot at Employment Hero on Slack.
Yeah, I think it's also worth mentioning for those of you who are using Employment Hero, we have a fantastic tool for work anniversaries, birthdays. I think there are some other applications, but as a manager, I get notified in the days leading up to an important event like a work anniversary or a birthday. I get notified about my team members, and in fact, Hattie gets notified about everyone, and we make a point of celebrating that. So that's a really useful tool. If I've got team members overseas that I don't necessarily speak to on a daily basis, I always make a point of jumping in and sending them a note, an email, a Slack message, and just say, hey, congratulations, happy birthday, whatever it is. So that's a really important point. We've had Zoe, I just want to go back. We've had a specific question coming back to your point about making interdependency visible. We've had a specific question. You rattled off a couple of ideas about how to represent and display that. You specifically mentioned Gantt charts. Somebody's asked whether Gantt charts are good for showing interdependencies, but can you just maybe drill in a little bit more about some of your ideas about making things visible? Okay,
so probably the one that's powerful in terms of explaining interdependencies is what's called a results map. And if you go to Stacey Barr's website, which is staceybarr.com, and I'll put it in the chat in just a second, and type in results map on her website, you'll get a couple of different articles that show you what it looks like. It looks like a bullseye with a bunch of little bubbles with interconnecting lines. But what's helpful is the story that it tells. And when you do it together, it showcases, it builds an understanding of what each does. So it helps clean up some of the conversations we have, well, I'm just an admin, and people downplaying what their work they have in the field and in the organization. So that's the results map. Does a Gantt chart do a good enough job of explaining interdependencies? From a project management point of view, yeah, sure. From a whole of organization point of view, no, it's more project based, that particular one. So those are the two examples that I gave. Another one that you can do, which is like even very basic and non-electronic in some ways, is something like a thermometer is an example of how to make progress visible. That doesn't showcase interdependencies, but it shows results. Yeah. It's like, how far are we far or near from our targets for this particular quarter? So those kinds of gamification strategies are also on the table.
Yeah, we when we were in the office, we used to have whiteboards, especially for our quarterly themes. But now we've just translated those to charts online, and we emphasize them at all hands each week. I also will mention to people, a couple of episodes ago, we did a talk about goal setting, and specifically within that, the framework of company missions cascading down to OKRs is the most common methodology that we talked about. And again, if people are looking for ideas about how to connect the organization behind a single mission, a set of goals, and keep the key results accountable, I'd suggest you go back and take a listen to that. Indeed, again, for Employment Hero clients, there is an OKRs module that facilitates that. Rev, we've got another question here, which I'm going to throw to you, but it could be for anyone. There are obviously lots of instances over the last 12 months where some team members have disengaged, where managers perhaps have not been able to keep all of their team engaged for whatever reason. How do managers re-engage with those people? What are some great examples of how you can turn that situation around? Not an easy question.
Yeah, and I think to your point and Zoe's point, leaders do play a big role. 100%, and but at the same time, it is everyone's responsibility. We have to come together and we have to rise together. David, I spoke about that Future Forum research, and actually one of the other results that came out when asked about the challenge about hybrid work was actually sense of belonging. And feeling a part of the team was one of the biggest challenge they also equally saw as part of hybrid work. So which does mean you've got to use technology to the advantage of bringing people together and make them feel, and as implemented rightly, sense of belonging increases. So one of the things that I do with the team is, when I do have, status checks, use technology, use tools to see how you're progressing. You've got Salesforce, you've got every other application that gives you reports of how the team is doing or how the customers are doing. But during the team meeting, we actually do a storytelling. We talk about what's going on in each other's life, and it's all about the focus is on well-being and mindfulness. So that's one thing. And another thing, previous to COVID situation, earth tones or any of the employee resource group was existing, but it is more meaningful and thoughtful now. For example, I head the Earth Tones ERG for APAC region, and we recently had a conversation which was purely around, how do we challenge and how do we face when you're a person of color with imposter syndrome or whatever that looks like. So there is a sense of conversation where they are feeling safe. And how do you bring that? And it is important you constantly check on that. So constant checking is definite, as a leader, it's a responsibility. Storytelling versus status checks. Earth tones or any of the ERGs, women's ERG or out ERG, whatever that looks like, creating that forum where people do go and can participate and talk to their peers of similar nature. And then one of the other things, there is a public resource around CEO of Culture Amp. CEO puts a weekly recording that talks about, what is going on in their mind, at the same time checking on people. So status checks as leaders, I think that is equally important. And we do have Ask Me Anything sessions where, they do, everyone joins together and can ask any question. It doesn't have to be specific to the function or the business. It can be anything. In fact, our CEO once dialed in from the laundry and we asked questions while he was in his own pace. So, things like that to show, even leaders are vulnerable, right? And we are human. We do have similar situation and thought that an individual is going through within the organization. So how do we rise together is a theme that we've got to think about.
They're great points, Rev. And then I just would add into that, one of the things that we've found really effective is that checking in that you were talking about. So a regular cadence of one-on-ones with your managers. And we have a great template in Employment Hero, and you can create your own through Google Docs, where we do start our one-on-ones by asking our employees how they'd rate their happiness on a 1 to 10 basis. With that open-ended question, you can really start a very good dialogue with someone. It could be something personal or it could be work, and you can really start that dialogue around how you can improve their happiness at work.
Yeah, and pulse taking, those happiness surveys, they've come up a number of times through this series. Rev, you mentioned constant checking, and I think that's something that we need to be very cognizant of in a remote environment, is that you don't have those casual, unplanned encounters of bumping into each other across the road, getting your coffee, or whilst you're walking up the stairs in the lift or whatever. So proactively, leaders taking the time to proactively check in with their teams on a daily basis. But what I found particularly interesting is your storytelling element, and trying to make the conversation deliberately about non-work related events. Because if I go up to somebody and say, "Are you okay?" 99% of the time, guess what the answer is? Yeah, I'm fine.
I'm fine.
Yep, I'm fine. But that storytelling and sharing the vulnerabilities and that, and I just wonder, if remote work, thinking about the CEO dialing in from the laundry, I wonder if remote work has actually made us a little bit more open as people. We're not just the person sitting at the desk that I see in the cubicle next to me. Yeah, I am actually a person who has red and white cushions and a piano that never gets played by my teenage children anymore.
Correct. The bridge between the team members have reduced. The transparency is increased because you see them, they are visible, and you can access and reach out to them easily. Long gone are the days where you have a reception at an executive floor, right? So they're there. They are visible, and you can reach out to them and talk.
Terrific. We're rapidly running out of time. I want to move on to some questions coming in. Hattie, I'm going to throw one to you in a minute about our welcome packs and our reward and recognition. But before I do that, there's a question from the audience about how, as a team member, I can notify my managers and my leaders that I might be experiencing Zoom fatigue, given that meetings may be even more prevalent now than they ever were. Any tips on how to deal with Zoom fatigue, and perhaps asking the company to tone it down?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd go back to Kim Scott, who's written a wonderful book about being very candid. And as it goes back to vulnerability, which Rev was talking about, you just have to pluck up the courage to communicate to your manager that you are feeling Zoom fatigued and you're going to turn your video off for this particular call. I remember when I was at Google, I had a weekly 3 a.m. video team meeting because I was the sucker that was in APAC. And I never turned my video on, but I was very clear about the reason why, because I'd just gotten out of bed. So yeah, you just need to pluck up the courage to be vulnerable and to share that, because your manager's then going to understand, and you can turn the video off and just listen in. We have virtual social chit chats, and some people who might be introverted or working, they will jump on and say, "Hi everyone, I'm just here to listen to the conversation. I'm going to turn my video off, or I'm going to mute myself." And they are simply dialing in because they want that human touch. And again, back to Rev's point, they want to listen to a conversation that's not about work, but they don't want to be involved because they're busy doing some work. So you just need to be really clear. It's not dissimilar to updating your Slack channel. You might go dark, which quite often I will if I'm working on a project or doing something important. Just let people know so they don't expect you to get back to them immediately.
Yeah, so that turning cameras off. Rev and Zoe, anything to add to that particular question?
Terrific. 100%. I think we started off, we made the mistake and we've corrected ourselves, right? So that's the whole thing. And this is one of those. And we don't have an exact formula of future of work yet. There's still that's moving. We are going to change. We are going to evolve, which does mean that you've got to course correct yourself. And if things don't work, make an observation and influence the thinking of your organization.
Yeah, terrific. And again, to all the leaders listening, make sure you're reaching out to your teams and checking how they feel about Zoom and number of meetings each day. Sorry, Hattie, back to you with the question. Can we find out more about the EH welcome pack, what's in it, and what's our reward and recognition? I'm going to keep you to 60 seconds, if that's okay.
Absolutely. We can send out a one-pager on what's in our welcome pack. It's everything that would need to be set up to succeed. It's some branded things, as well as some fun things like toilet paper and your first drink for happy hour after our all hands. Sorry, what was the second question? Oh, reward and recognition. So we do that through our platform. We do simple shout outs, and then we do values champions, which are aligned to our 5 values. For someone that's really gone above and beyond, they receive what we call hero dollars that they can then go and spend in our discount store. Super easy to implement if you don't have Employment Hero, but really important that you base your reward and recognitions around your values so that you're reinforcing those behaviors and people really understand them and that they feel rewarded and recognized for work that they've done. It's been so fantastic, and it literally takes 2 minutes to do a shout out to a colleague or announce someone's anniversary or birthday.
Yeah, terrific. And I'll also add the reporting that comes with that you highlight every Friday at All Hands, you do a slide on who was the most shouted out and who gave the most shout outs and things like that. Yeah, terrific. All right, we're in the last few minutes, so I'm going to maybe just turn back to our panelists for today. Rev, as we sort of look towards the future, and perhaps a reminder here, at least in Sydney, that this is probably not going to be the last time we have to work under forced remote. We are going to be in a situation where we're dealing with colleagues who work to a different cadence. Can I ask you perhaps for your number one reflection on what you would be advising leaders and team leaders and company leadership about working across flexible times, flexible hours?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is put people at the center. Think about inclusivity, think about people, and work your collaboration strategy around that. And I think it should be meaningful for the individual, and it should be meaningful for the business with, of course, security, compliance, everything put in place. But it is important to hold that people at the center of your thinking.
Terrific, and I'm going to say proactively, not just in a policy document, but proactively connecting with your team.
Yes.
Yeah, terrific. Zoe, I'm going to give you the same opportunity as we think about the future and the fact that remote is here to stay, either by demand or requirements. What's the sort of number one thought that you'd leave with leaders of teams and businesses around remote and asynchronous working?
For me, it's the conversation around and. How can it be best for the employee and best for the organization, and to have a collaborative conversation around those 2 points.
Short and sweet. Thank you very much. And finally, Hattie, we are a remote first organization now, not necessarily triggered, perhaps accelerated by COVID, but we will certainly remain remote. We have to. We don't have enough office space anymore. I think we've got about 100% more people than we can fit in an office anymore. What do you think about the remote and asynchronous going forward?
Yeah, look, Rev made the point. There's no exact formula for the future of remote work. We are happy to admit here at Employment Hero that we're novices and we're learning as we go. So my number one thing would be checking in with employees and surveying them and asking them for their feedback on a continuous basis. At our All Hands, we have a tool called Slido where people can ask questions also. So not dissimilar to Ask Me Anything, that goes to the CEO and the leadership team. And something we've implemented also are remote first principles, which we will continue to iterate on. A really good example there is if someone dials into a meeting, everyone dials into the meeting so that you do get that inclusiveness. And that's been really important. So you don't have one group of people having a beer in a conference room in Sydney and everyone else dialing in. It just gives that sense of everyone being included.
Yeah, terrific. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Finally, I just want to ask Rev and Zoe, if people, and Hattie, if people want to follow this conversation online, even potentially reach out to you directly, what are the best ways? Zoe, I'll start with you. Where are you most active online?
LinkedIn, Zoe Routh, Routh.
Terrific. And Rev?
Same here. LinkedIn is a first source.
Terrific.
And same with me, LinkedIn.
Awesome. All right. Well, hopefully, if anyone has ongoing questions, I think we got through most of them today. A couple that we'll answer subsequently. But thank you all very much for your time and for your thoughts. And thank you very much to all our guests for joining us again. Next week is our last episode, and we're going to be really focusing in on the practicalities. We're really going to try and focus in on everything that we've learned and heard over the last 6 weeks, and really try and come up with some really practical and practical tools to implement. And Hattie, I may be asking you to join us again for that episode. But in the meantime, Rev, Zoe, Hattie, thank you very much for your time, and we'll wrap it up there for this week. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Zoe and Rev. Bye.